Hey Dan, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on it.
Awesome. Of course, of course. Dan, so tell us, what is Farcaster?
Farcaster is a crypto native social network. It's decentralized. It's also built on a, kind of a protocol, but day to day, it feels a lot like Twitter, but with a bunch of people who are interested in crypto.
Awesome. Why did you shadow ban me? I'm just kidding.
I don't think I ever shadow banned you. Like shadow ban is not even a real word. It's there's an algorithm that basically says is if you're not following someone, do you want to see this person's content by default? We've had a bunch of iterations on it, but ultimately, if you follow someone, you see their content, and I think that's actually the kind of guarantee at the protocol level in the sense that like if I choose to follow someone, I'm going to respect that. But to the degree that like you're a random account on the network and you just are kind of like, this is not you, but I'm just pointing out, like if you just reply to a bunch of people, it'd be the equivalent of them walking up to the street they're on the street and they're having a conversation and you start yelling at them, right? So yes, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And there's the kind of an expectation that people are there to kind of interact with other people. But same time, I've said this line multiple times, no one's entitled to anyone else's attention. Yeah. And so I think like the shift from, and people don't complain about this anymore because like basically we've improved our spam model significantly. I think channels are now kind of a place where the mods are in control. So there are no spam labels that apply to channels.
I'm mostly pulling your point, Dan. I'm mostly pulling your point.
Yeah. No, I'm just trying to give people context because I'm sure people from Farcaster will listen to this. So
yeah, Dan, tell us. So like, how did you solve for the cold start problem in creating this decentralized network that is Farcaster? Because you chose like a really hard problem, which is number one, instead of like there's already a hard problem of a social network, but then you took it a step further and solving for a decentralized social network. And then you took it a step further on focusing on a niche of developers for that decentralized social network. So yeah, could you like outline that line of thought?
Yeah, well, we started working on it in 2020. So it was kind of pre-Elon buying Twitter. So I think our original point of view was decentralized social was not really a thing yet. I mean, Mastodon existed, and there were a couple of other implementations, Secure Scuttlebutt, and other things like that. But and I guess Nostr at the same time was getting started, but we weren't aware of it. And so I think our point of view was Twitter, circa 2020 was kind of a hot mess in terms of like it was controlled by a pretty censorship-oriented regime. Going through COVID and that election, and there's just kind of a lot of stuff that's since come out that was like, okay, there were people putting their finger on the scales in terms of like what the public square could or could not talk about. And so I think that was like kind of an interesting opportunity to go after and make a bet over the kind of like 5 to 10 years that the world would move away from kind of these monolithic Web 2 social graphs towards something that's a little bit looks more like cryptocurrency. And I think Varun and I had both been at Coinbase for 5 years. And so I think we were pretty excited about like the possibilities that Ethereum as a global computer, right? Like not necessarily just a financial ecosystem, you could use it for specifically as it relates to identity at the most primitive level of like a public and private key representing a user. So there's some inspiration from a startup called Keybase that later sold to Zoom, but this idea that like everyone on the internet could have a publicly mapped pub private key. In this case, it was an Ethereum address. And I think that was the kind of like kernel of, okay, could we go build a protocol and then a social network on top of this? 4 years later, I think we were right that the world would move more towards decentralized social networks. I think we were wrong on the one crypto being the kind of like best technology for the job in a world where Elon buys Twitter and creates enough incentive for people to kind of like move away that basically like you can kind of think of ActivityPub, Fediverse, and then AT Proto, Blue Sky. It's kind of a variation. It's a federated system that had existed for a while. There was no real pushed for people to get onto those types of platforms. If anything, prior to Elon buying Twitter, the only people who were leaving Twitter were right-wing oriented people, right? And so that said, I think like where we are today, we have failed to capture the interest from people leaving Twitter as a result of Elon. And I think that that's pretty natural. Like, we're crypto oriented. The types of people who aren't into Elon probably also don't like crypto. And I think that was something that also happened in the last couple of years, is the whole FTX blow up. I think I've been in crypto 10 years. I think it definitely set back the kind of like perception and reputation of like crypto generally. I think that will recover. It'll just take time. And so I think we've had to tack much more into just like focusing on crypto native folks and building a network that is kind of like oriented towards people who are interested in cryptocurrency and or building in cryptocurrency or adjacent. And I think that's like the kind of, as you point out, the core of the network. I think in terms of tactics to solve the cold start problem, this is 2021, so it's pre-Elon. So I'm just like focused on how can I find people who are kind of interested in joining a decentralized social network. I have a pretty extensive network from my time in Silicon Valley. So I did roughly on the order of like 400 onboardings via Google Meet or Zoom call. Most of those people churned, right? A lot of those people are kind of like in my professional social network, so they're pretty busy. They have big audiences on Twitter already. So there's kind of no reason for them to join this like very small thing. But the group of people that did stick around, they kind of became the my first 10 DAO or our first 10 DAO, and then, soon up to about 100. And I think once you get about 100 daily active users of anything, like you start to have a much better sense of like, okay, the profile of the person that it's working for. This is in consumer. It's enterprise, I'd say about 10 customers, you probably are closer. But 100 order of magnitude daily actives of the product, you can kind of figure out that profile. You can ask them for referrals. And yeah, then it was kind of a grind for basically 2 more years until we went permissionless basically last year this time. So then anyone could sign up, and the network, grew a little bit, but like overall, we were kind of hovering around, single digit thousand DAO every day. So really sloggy in terms of trying to build a social network. It's kind of not like Facebook, one of these like viral things that goes. And we had a big moment in the beginning of this year with frames and kind of just like the developer excitement about Farcaster. And so had like a rough 10x in terms of the total daily active usage of the network, maybe even more of that. And that's roughly sustained, not the peak, but in terms of the network is a lot larger than it was at the beginning of the year. But I think we've failed to figure out, okay, how do you solve for 2 things? One, non-crypto natives are just not as interested in it, which is fine. I think that there's plenty of room to still grow within crypto. But I think the people who are interested in crypto that aren't active on Farcaster, there's kind of like 2 primary reasons. So the first is they're just like not in the Ethereum ecosystem. So if you're into Solana, it's a religious thing, right? It's like, oh, this is an Ethereum app, even though most of Farcaster actually from an architecture standpoint is off chain. We built kind of this pretty particular stack that works for us. But we do have a little bit on a blockchain as when you go to create the account. And I think even just that is a little, just doesn't work for people who view the value of apps as downstream of their L1 or kind of like cryptocurrency bags.
Why do you think that?
I think that's like solvable in the medium to longer term if we were to add more support and kind of like, turn Farcaster from like a church to an interfaith prayer room. So it's like, not specific to any one chain. But I think our belief is like still the highest concentration of developer activity is in Ethereum, despite maybe some of the numbers that Solana can put out. And I have a lot of respect for everyone building the Solana ecosystem, especially the founders of Solana. But like, I think for us, it's like focus on one thing first, get good at that, and then maybe expand. And I think the second reason is, and this is a little more challenging to solve for, is so Twitter used to be, or crypto used to be very Reddit centric. When I first started at Coinbase, it was like our Bitcoin, our Ethereum, like you can go see the old Vitalik posts on our Ethereum. Like the social media that crypto people used was more forum based. And then kind of during the last bull market, or call it last bull market and a half, crypto moved to Twitter, and thus we have crypto Twitter. And I think that the kind of existing audiences for these large accounts are just too hard to go recreate on a new thing. And so you get some idealistic people, which is great, like people who truly are in it for the decentralization or the protocols and stuff like that. But I think a very rational thing is like, look, if you've got 100, 200, 300,000 followers on Twitter, why would you go spend time on a network where it's subscale? If your goal is distribution, right? Like if your goal is like engage with, the most interesting people, I mean, a lot of those people are on Twitter, but like you may make an argument that there's some really interesting pockets on Farcaster that you'd want to spend your time. But I actually think most of what these big public social networks are for, in a world where a lot of kind of like meaningful conversations happen in private and in like chat groups, I think that the public domain tends to be a lot more broadcast, audience building, you can call it shilling, you can call it memeing, whatever you want. And so I think that for better or for worse, the arena to kind of fight for crypto retail attention, or kind of like the mimetic attention within cryptos, is X, right? If you're in Ethereum, the people you are fighting are Solana and Bitcoin people. They're both on X, even though Bitcoiners have Nostr, like their own network. And so I think like we've yet to figure out a way to like sufficiently pull in that element of crypto Twitter. In addition, there's actually this like whole other part that I would call the highbrow part of crypto that just like they can't be bothered. Like they're like, I'm too busy working on whatever sophisticated infrastructure roadmap. I don't want to deal with another app. And they're not even distribution maxing as much as just like out of habit. And so I think that there's just the population of people who are willing to adopt kind of like a new frontier network within crypto, given the predominance of crypto Twitter and the fact that crypto Twitter doesn't actually, if anything, they find Elon like aligned. Whereas I think like if you kind of look at some of the growth that's happened on kind of what I'd say left of center, decentralized social, so you can have Threads and Blue Sky. No one is actually in it for the technology. There are definitely developers that are interested in it for like the open source component, but the reason people are signing up for the thing is that it's not run by Elon, and we just don't have that kind of tailwind from a growth standpoint. So that's a long-winded way of saying that I think we're doubling down on crypto. I think crypto market feels like it's kind of picking back up, and building on 10 years of experience in crypto for my co-founder Varun and myself, and just trying to build a social network and protocol, right? It's like kind of like one and the same. That is kind of like the best place that if you want to be on the frontier of crypto, you are on Farcaster, and you're checking it weekly, if not daily.
And have you like kind of like, I know your focus is completely on the crypto audience, and you said non-crypto folks aren't as interested. But is there a world where you're looking at bringing in like other non-crypto communities into Farcaster? Like for an example, there's like creatives, like the artist channels. Not all of them are like NFT maxing or anything. They're just there for the community, for an example. And there's developers that are also like, some of them are Web2 developers, but they like the engagement and those interesting conversations.
Yeah, I think it's a big enough network now that you can attract people who are not necessarily crypto native, or they have a friend who convinced them, and they could care less about trading a meme coin, but they, like to your point, they've made friends. So that's the best way to get people to stick around on any app, is if they feel like they have a community that they're going to be there. I think the challenge with like just this, like, can you bring these communities, or can you bring these creators, or can you onboard these audiences? I think it starts to like just first principles. Like what is Farcaster offering them that they can't get somewhere else? And if you can give me like a coherent, like clear value prop that actually resonates with those people, congrats, like you're hired, like you're running, growth at Farcaster. But like, I get into this kind of set of discussions on Farcaster quite a bit. Like people have a lot of advice. And my push is always like, okay, like give me something concrete. Like, who is a person? Like, have you talked to this person? Like, what would they tell you? Because I think like having talked to thousands, if not 10,000 plus people at this point about getting on to Farcaster individually in DMs, like talking through whatever. Whether they tell you it's cool or it's that they're unhappy with X, the revealed preference, which is a big favorite phrase of mine with consumers, is they're just busy, like habit, like they don't actually care, they don't want to do the work. And so I think that in that world, like just like generic points of view or like kind of abstract, like, oh, this is a good reason, that doesn't actually translate to growth. Like, whereas, for example, I think like one cohort of people on Farcaster that have come in the, post permissionless, weren't necessarily in there in the early days, was a result of kind of like the combo of like frames and degen, like attracting a lot of attention. Degen, the coin of Farcaster. And you talk to people and it's like, oh, I came because originally I heard about this, thought it was a way to make some money or, whatever. And then I stuck around for the social network, and now they're building within the ecosystem. They have a channel. There's like many such cases of that example. And so I think that is like something that is like, how do you actually have this be repeatable, right? Where it's like, if people who are on the cutting edge of crypto are going to be experimenting and coming up with the new flavor of the week of something interesting, effectively new game. And I was actually casting about this earlier, Anon being the latest, where we have these kind of anonymous group accounts, and one of them is ZK based, and you have to own some token to be able to post. Vitalik recently joined that anonymity set, so that's kind of made it more exciting for people. But I think like that is cool, like really cool, and degen is cool, and Moxie and all of these things, but like you need a constant stream of them in order to drive growth, versus otherwise it'll just kind of be too sporadic.
Yeah.
And that's just not how social networks grow. All that said is, I think we're in a somewhat unique situation. Is relative to our progress, we probably have more funding in the history of social networks than basically any social network, because one, most social networks, if you just look at the large social networks, there hasn't been one outside of TikTok, which we can talk about in a second, that had reached scale and then stayed at scale, right? Like you have some examples of kind of like flash in the pan ones. But since maybe 2013 or 2014. So it's basically still like the deployment phase of mobile. Mobile is mature. There is no like kind of low hanging fruit. If you have a good feature, the at scale guys will copy it, right? So Instagram with stories, and then Instagram with Reels with TikTok, and then I think like Twitter Spaces with Clubhouse. Like basically, if you have a pre-existing graph and daily active users, if the feature is simple enough, you can kind of just stick it in your app, and it kind of kills the growth of the other app on their novel feature. So social networks are kind of in this place where we just don't have many new ones these days. And then I think the second thing is, if you go to TikTok, the reason it worked is they had a parent company in China that was willing to spend billions of dollars per year in Facebook ads to acquire the kind of like marketplace of kind of like creators and consumers, as well as an at scale machine learning model that was already working on their kind of like products in China. And so I think that's not replicable for most startups. And so I think like where we are is we're in a unique situation that there's a pool of capital that is dedicated basically to crypto, that believes in the long-term potential of crypto. And that's just like a reality. So that money is not fungible for the most part to go and back an AI company. It's like been allocated. It's like crypto funds. Like that's the way it works. And so as a result of building the decentralized social network within crypto, which we still think is actually the best long-term architecture for this, right? It's not. We're in a unique situation that we have a lot of funding, small team, staying focused. And so what I'm optimistic about is if we can continue to stay focused and iterate and kind of like figure out, is there a scene here within crypto that actually can kind of align things that make Farcaster kind of interesting to people who are crypto native, and to kind of like pull in those people from Twitter or just get some of their attention to be able to actually spend on Farcaster, then there's actually like a path to significant amount of daily active user growth, which then I think creates the flywheel around real, kind of scaled developer interest and activity.
Yeah, how do you think
I
about
think the challenge for other networks though is the infrastructure to run something like Twitter is expensive. And if you're subscale, like your ad monetization won't work. And so, yeah, maybe you have subscriptions, but even there, that might not work. And so there's actually kind of this potential where it's like, just because you have a successful protocol that's growing users doesn't actually mean it's a good business. And it's 2024. And so I actually don't think anyone is thinking that, oh, invest in the fast growing thing and then monetize. Like, no, it's like, no, the zero interest rates are gone. We are at mature social. People understand the game. And so actually I think you need to be much more cognizant of like, what is the long-term sustainable path for any type of protocol? And in my view, crypto-based protocols, you know, there's still some work to do there, but like I think the regulatory environment is going to change pretty significantly over the next couple of years, especially in the US. But my point is I actually think cryptocurrency is like the obvious thing that if you pair it, you know, deeply integrate it with the protocol, that actually can create sustainability long term, as well as governance and all these other kind of things. And so I think we're just scratching the surface on a lot of this stuff. It's taken us 10 years to get the infrastructure in place, the regulatory in place, that I do think if you were to kind of like fast forward over the next 5 years, I do think you're actually going to start to see kind of like protocols that are able to outcompete because of the kind of like economic model that crypto enables, as well as like governance and things like that.
Those are all like really great points, Dan. Thank you for that context, especially with the TikTok context. I didn't know about TikTok's usage of Facebook ads to attract users. That's a cool point. And yeah, so I was really curious also, which is like, what are some, like, I know permissionless was an inflection point for you guys. Then there came frames, which 10x your user base. How do you think around these releases that act as like a major release of new users and attention? You mentioned this in our conversation, which was these like points for like getting that attention from like the Twitter audience and from other social networks to come to your network. They're critical. Now, like, how do you and the team like think about these releases?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little hard to replicate for everyone, because if you know you're sitting at 700 Twitter followers or whatever, I don't know how many Twitter followers. I'm just coming to hypothetical as a founder. If you don't have distribution, then that's not necessarily maybe the optimal strategy. But in my case, I think I started working on Farcaster. I probably had like something like 20,000, 25,000 followers. Now I have like 110,000. So I don't have like crazy number, but definitely enough, right? And I think there's an aspect that one is you actually building an audience direct is so valuable. And so there's actually kind of this like midwit meme of like how social media used for a founder. And there's also another version of that. So let me get. So basically, like founders, like you should actually be trying to build an audience on Twitter all the time. And it's not in the LinkedIn thread boy like version, like, because I actually think you're building the wrong audience there. It's more of like if you're in the actual like kind of weeds of whatever frontier thing you're working on, you can actually share like observations and insights that don't have to be necessarily earth-shattering, but just by virtue of you being at the edge, you actually are going to come across on social media as someone interesting to follow, and so people will kind of naturally follow you and things like that. So I think that's like a very easy thing, especially for an engineer that may or not, you know, classic founder who's like more introverted. Is social media is actually like a great way to build your profile as someone who is thoughtful and like, you know, kind of like an expert in their domain or kind of on the edge there. So like an example is like, let's say you're building a consumer crypto app and you're playing around with passkeys. You can just be tweeting about like passkeys and like little demo videos and things like that. And that actually plays really well in the algo. Whereas a push towards these like moments, I actually think it's like people manifest and they see the moments and then they assume that, oh, the way to make your startup grow is to like save up energy and then like release something. And then that's actually what happens. We didn't have the expectation that frames would kind of be this huge boost. It was just like, we have a cadence of shipping, literally trying to ship something every week and putting a little bit of effort in to kind of just make it feel like it's you know, we had feature release Fridays or whatever of Farcaster. I mean, obviously it's a little different because we're building on our own network, But the point is that like most things you can turn into like a bull post in terms of like for your marketing as a founder. So like anytime you're working on a technical problem, like even if it's kind of the most boring, like did you do something a little different, or like you can make the most mundane things sometimes when you're building. One, it like other people resonate with it because they've had to do it, and two, if you're trying to make things a little bit better, or you're sharing a best practice or something that you know kind of thought of, that and you're just constantly doing it, that actually helps just like build the audience, build the brand, and then naturally when you have a moment, you can actually kind of capitalize on that. Which, by the way, we never have done any press. Like it's just like the way we've done Farcaster, and I learned this from biology, which was much more contrarian at the time when he was doing it. But like, it's just post directly to Twitter. Like, why do you need this? And then ask your investors or ask people in your network or people who, you know, naturally they're going to retweet it or, you know, on Farcaster recast it. But like, I think that's a like very simple way of brand building. It's just like you should be flooding the zone. It's like there should be something from you every day or every other day that feels like you are making progress, like you're showing momentum. Now, there's a diminishing returns if you're posting like 200 times a day. Like that's probably not the best use of time. But the point is that like my push to people is like you could probably come up with one interesting thing every day. Here's the other thing. You probably have hobbies or things that you're interested in or books you're reading or whatever. Post that stuff too. Like that's fine. And just try to like be like, okay, how can I make an interesting point? Can I ask an open-ended question, which potentially people will respond? But yeah, I think like that's a big belief of mine is like most founders should just be trying to build their own distribution, which is like you don't need a marketing team. You don't need a comms team. Like that's stuff that happens when you're like way bigger scale. Like you don't even need a brand account. Like this is like the most like cringe thing ever. Is like, you know, people who have basically no followers and then they're trying to get their company to have followers. It's like, no, just like build your own audience. Because you might pivot your company like 3 times, and then each time you're like creating a new account, and then you're like, no, it's just like the people want to follow the journey that you're doing. And so I think that is like, you know, it's 2024. Like it's founder-led marketing for a very long time.
Awesome. And to wrap things up, Dan, what's your like favorite animal and why?
It's changed over the years. I used to really like otters. There was this series called Redwall. I don't know if you've ever read Redwall. It's like basically about you know, kind of like mice and otters and bunnies like fighting more evil animals like foxes, wolves, whatever. It's a children's book series, but for whatever reason, I really liked the otters in that series. I think now I probably like lions. I think, you know, they're kind of pretty regal. I was fortunate enough to go to Tanzania probably a decade ago now, and seeing those animals like in their natural habitat, you're like, okay, king of the jungle, like king of the savannah, like you kind of get that in terms of just they're pretty spectacular animals.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for your time. Really appreciate it. And that's all for today.